Colin. All right. Welcome, everybody. We have two amazing returning guests to the HR Morning Show. We have Jocelyn King and John Baldino. So Jocelyn, why don't you give us a quick, for anyone who's out there and doesn't know you, why don't you give a quick intro, and then John will have you do the same here.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to see you. Hey, John, good to see you too. My name is Jocelyn King. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called VirgilHR. I've been an HR professional my whole career, saw a really huge need in the compliance space as it relates to employment and labor law, and built a software to help HR professionals stay compliant real time.
Shout out to Virgil HR and John returning, my former co-host.
Yes. John Baldino, been around for a little while in HR, and I'm coming to you live actually from another conference. I'm at SHRM Inclusion in Denver.
Amazing.
So got to speak on inclusion and equity the past couple of days. So I'm winding down.
Jocelyn, are you there too?
No, I'm in Phoenix. So
Oh,
John and I are probably both working out of hotel rooms right now.
Yes. Yes.
amazing. Well, we are going to we're gonna chat about, obviously, the election is today, but we're gonna talk about like how, as HR leaders, we can navigate, what's obviously going to happen when the results are in. Like, how do you kind of navigate that? How do you navigate that conversation with employees? Because obviously, there's gonna be people who aren't excited about the results. There's gonna be people who are. And Jocelyn, it sounds like you or Virgil HR, you guys did a talk about this at a conference recently. So I'd love to kind of get your initial thoughts on, how should HR be navigating this conversation with kind of like with after the election is obviously finished and the results are in. Like, how do you navigate that?
Sure. Yeah, it was actually a webinar that John and I did together maybe 6 weeks or so ago. And I think there was a lot of interest there. It's so tricky bringing politics into the workplace. It's obviously very emotional for a lot of people. And there can be great discourse, but it can also create a lot of inefficiencies and lack of productivity in the workplace. And I remember when Trump beat Hillary back in the day. Uh, in the workplace that I was in, the company that I was at, there were quite a few employees that were emotionally distraught. Uh,
Hmm.
they couldn't come into work. They needed to take time off. We had to refer them to our employee assistance programs so they could talk to a therapist. Like, it hit them really hard. And I could see something similar happening this time around as well. So, what I would really suggest is, making sure that employees know they can come talk to HR about whatever issues they're having, but kind of, and it really does depend on your culture, but kind of making it clear that, look, like, work is work. Politics maybe doesn't need to come into it. If you are having an issue, please talk to your manager. Please talk to HR. We will give you the support that you need. I wouldn't advocate for just giving people the day off. I'd have them take a vacation day or a personal day, whatever you offer, just to not, set a precedence that you'd regret later on down the line. And making sure they know that, no matter what, you're there to support the, emotional needs that they have, or any type of accommodations that they require at work that are reasonable. And I think John spoke a lot about kind of what was reasonable. So I'll kind of let you piggyback on that because you speak about it way more eloquently than I did. But yeah, but I think that's really important.
Yeah, John, I was going to ask you, like, kind of based on what Jocelyn said, like, should companies actually like lay out and communicate a plan, and like how should they communicate that? And then I would love to know like what those reasonable accommodations would look like as well in your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be very careful because what winds up happening for some organizations, and I know that an organization may want to choose a side. I know, I get it. But not every person may pick the same side as the company. I mean, when we see the results today, there's going to be a consideration around popular vote. There's going to be, I'm going to say, 45% minimum on either side of popular vote that someone may get. So 100% of people can tell you that they're going to vote one way, but when they get into that voting booth, choosing something else at times, right? So if a company lays out a plan to say, should X candidate win, we are going to, activate these kinds of support structures, et cetera, as opposed to should Y candidate win, we're going to grab champagne and, be very excited. And so you have to be thoughtful about the fact that you do have individuals who have perspectives, and that's not just line level, that's all the way up to C suite as well, just to be super clear there. So I
Yeah.
think generally, Jocelyn's right. We need to be thoughtful about the encouragement maybe to first level resources that are already available. Hey, you've got PTO, sick time, even. If for a mental health day, those sorts of things that may be necessary for you to deal with the results that may come in one way or the other. That's your time to use. So we're not going to hold anything against you for taking time to do so. If it becomes a longer accommodation, if I'm really struggling, I'm having difficulty with some coping mechanisms around what the future will now look like, I agree. I think we need to be thoughtful about EAP, but by and large, most organizations don't have access to an EAP. And as an aside, only 3% utilization is happening with EAPs across this country. So they're not usually a primary resource anyway. Look at what county and local resources are available to you to help with some of those individuals that are expressing need for support. I think HR can be a great conduit for that. I'd be very hesitant to sort of do the I knows, I don't understand, how could you be upset about this? Those kinds of things are really not our position. That's not an accommodation consideration. You're not helping. Instead, you really want to hear from them. And accommodation, strictly speaking, right, we have to be thoughtful around some type of medical professional I'm going to say proof or write up or something that really helps us to know what might this look like, because open-ended accommodation could be really difficult for an organization. It's not reasonable. So we have to work through that interactive process healthily, without an opinion one way or the other for a candidate, and really just listen to people and then offer what resources are available.
I was going to ask too, just from your point of view, because both of you have obviously been in HR for um, a period of time to probably see the shift. Have we seen over the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years, maybe 10, 15 years, just like a real shift towards it becoming a lot more emotional than maybe it was in the past? And like kind of how do then HR leaders need to, I guess, shift their approach and even how they're coaching like leaders with with what to communicate? Does that make sense,
Oh,
John? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm sure we're going to get here. Let's create some buzz, right?
Yeah.
I hear more HR people talking about a particular candidate over another.
Right.
It will affect the way in which you may interact with someone else within your organization. And so the neutrality part, to a degree, has to be considered. I'm not saying that an individual person can't be excited or proud for whom they want to support and go forward with. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes positionally, we have to remember that there's a whole that we have to be thought of. WHOLE. There's a whole that we have to be thought of. And so, in this context, we really have a privilege of being able to navigate a very difficult season. The last 8 years have been really difficult with a lot of very tense conversations. I don't know that it's going to end anytime soon. Some of this is beyond just a candidate for president. It really is. I think Danielle said it a few minutes ago. There's a lot of cultural considerations happening in our country, shifts in whose voices are being heard, the way in which we look at various groups of people. So this is beyond purely about just one candidate, but really the stretch that organizations have to be willing to consider of what's the future going to be like? Who's the population that's coming in to become workers in our organization, not just the ones that we have today? Who will those be, and how do we set up some infrastructure in support of those truths?
Yeah,
I
Justin, your
would
thoughts?
add to it as well that I think where we've really seen a shift is when social media kind of took over, because then all of a sudden individuals had a voice in a
Yeah.
public setting about politics, and it became much more emotional. I think that there's kind of more personal buy-in to their political candidate at that point, the political opinion. It ends up influencing the people around you, and then that happens at work too. And so that's kind of where I think we've seen a really big shift. In working with leaders, though, and John, I would actually love for you to talk a bit about this because you did it in the webinar too, just about the liability aspect behind leaders kind of overly promoting politics. But as an HR professional and as a leader in the space, it's really important that you are influencing your fellow colleagues at the leadership level to maintain neutrality, because the last thing that you want to do is start creating division within your workforce, or people feeling uncomfortable that, oh, my VP of sales really loves Kamala. And now I feel like if I express my political opinion in any other way besides loving Kamala, that he or she won't like me anymore or something. So there's a lot more to it there. And I think that leaders really have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and I mean I'll just jump in quickly then to
Of
that
course, yeah.
point, Jocelyn. Thank you. But the liability part is real, right? So sometimes we don't remember that employment practice liability insurance that most organizations, if not all, have or should have, and there's a thread there that if we are actually the instigators of something that becomes liability producing. What does a hostile work environment look like? What's the basis for some of that? What does harassment in a broader sense look like? And so if you may have a carrier that says, well, you pushed a particular agenda that was not work related and didn't drive business performance forward, and you're causing individuals to seek workers' comp related claims because of mental health, exhaustion, stress, anxiety. Those kinds of things might be difficult, right, for us to sort of combat. And to poo poo someone to say, well, get over it is probably not the right answer. Right, especially if we're the ones internally instigating it. So just be thoughtful. You really need to know your audience. Keep that in mind. If I can be an encouragement today, know your audience. Don't assume that everybody thinks as you do. The numbers tell us differently. And quickly, I will say, Jocelyn, just something you brought up in an election gone by with Hillary and Trump, the polls were telling us something else until the day of the election. And so we need to be really mindful that we don't have all the data until the data's all in. So everyone just needs to take a breath and get through the day today. Get through the day as encouraging as we can be.
Yeah. I'm curious too, like when it comes to, I guess, conversations that we're having as individuals, like what's the best way to I mean, should we number one, should we be having any sort of conversation? Like, is it wise to have any sort of conversation politically, nowadays at work? Or like, can you have those conversations behind closed doors? And like, how do you just navigate those conversations? Just knowing that, like you said, John, people, everyone's going to have a different thought, right? And it's easy to assume that someone might think a certain way, and maybe it's not similar. So should we be having those conversations? And if we should, like, are those okay to have those behind closed doors? Like, what's your perspective there, Jocelyn? Oh,
Sorry.
there you go.
There we go. Yeah. Are you talking about having political discussions at work?
Yeah, and like it's like, for example, if you went out for, let's say, a drink with a coworker and it's the evening, like is that an appropriate time to have the conversation? Should you have that conversation during work hours? And like I guess like how should we just navigate individually in like a wise way?
Yeah. I mean, I think as an HR professional, maybe I'm a little more risk averse, but I think stay clear of those conversations, period, whether it's in the office or outside of the office. But when it's an employee, I would say, you know, uh, discourage political discussion in the workplace, but encourage it if they want to talk about it outside of work, so long as it's not creating some type of negative impact to the organization or the workplace or the culture at the end of the day. So I don't think that we need to come up with strict rules for it, but it is very culture specific, right? Like if you're an organization that has it had a really hard time mitigating these discussions in the workplace, you might want to put very clear policies in place to make sure everybody understands what the expectations are. But if you're in like my company, for example, we're a very low key, laid back workplace. I don't need to put a policy like that in place. I
Yeah.
would just handle it as a one-off if something came up.
Yeah.
And I think Jesse also said, and this is probably in line with that question, do companies need to communicate expectations about social media in regards to company interactions and politics? So maybe John, you could take that question.
Yeah, I mean, Jocelyn is the policy pro, but I think we'd be on the same page to say, yeah, I mean, if you're at, especially if you're at a certain size, yes, generally speaking, right, there should also always be some sort of social media consideration. How do they speak about the company, knowing that wages and working conditions are protected by law. So those things they can tweet about or post about. But yeah, maybe there are things that, broadly speaking, around positional statements that you try to make on behalf of the company. That may be something we need to have a policy about. But individual liberty still exists. So when someone, this also goes to things like, I'll say, dress code or uniform for your organization. If you're chill with t-shirts every day, and somebody comes in one day with a Trump shirt or a Kamala shirt, and now all of a sudden you feel some sort of way, that's super inconsistent.
Yeah.
You were okay for someone to wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt a couple of months ago that may have a political charge to it, but you were okay with that. Why all of a sudden now are you coming down on someone for a political t-shirt in another way? We have to be consistent. That's probably the kiss of death for most HR people.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to make sure I give a 15-second shout out to, if you're an HR practitioner and you don't feel equipped to handle this, please raise your hand. And you didn't go to school for this. If
Yeah.
you went to school for HR, that may not have been in the course load, in the work that you were asked to kind of prepare. So ask for support. Seek a colleague that you can say, hey, how are you navigating this? And find those resources. If it's not comfortable for you, you need to kind of speak up about that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and it's the power of community, right? And being involved in HR communities, going to people that you trust, being able to have those conversations openly. I was going to ask what I think, Jocelyn, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but where's the line between like a social issue and a political issue?
Mm.
And like, because does seem like, whether or not, I mean, at least from my perspective, that a lot of social issues they get politicized, right? And so one party might represent something. If you say, "Hey, I voted for this party," then suddenly a whole bunch of thoughts go into that. So, like, where's like, how do you talk about social issues that have been politicized, and how do you keep that division and still be neutral politically, if that makes sense?
That's a really good question, and I think a little hard to answer.
Yeah,
I'm
give me
so
the
excited
right
to hear
answer.
your
Well,
answer.
I love your just perspective on like
Yeah.
how to just start thinking about that, because I think it seems like it's become more and more of an issue over the last at least 10 years, in my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because social issues start as social issues and then often become politicized. And so it's like, where do you find it in that line to then cut it and say, hey, no, this is a political issue? John, you might have a better answer than I do for this because it is a really hard question. But what I would just suggest to any HR professional is like, use your best judgment as you are going through this each situation. To write a policy and say, oh, you can talk about social issues, but not political issues is going to get very, very tricky. So you want to be thoughtful about how you write a policy like that. And really what it comes down to is it going to be disruptive to the workplace at the end of the day? Because as an employer, that's what you care about. Is it going to be disruptive to our employees? Are they going to get upset? Are they doing their work? Are they not doing it? That's really what we care about here. I can't think of a social issue off the top of my head that I would kind of like ban necessarily. But once it does get to be a little more politically charged, like Black Lives Matter, for example, or, you know, um,
Mhm.
you could argue that at one point in time, even things like abortion might have been a social issue that very
Mhm.
quickly became a
Mhm.
political issue as well. So you just kind of have to play each thing by ear, in my opinion, and just work with your organization, your leaders, your culture, your workforce to make sure that you're on the same page and that, as John said, there's consistency in the things that you're doing and the rationale behind whatever it is you're deploying in the workforce from a
And
policy
that's
perspective.
like consistency with communication, and then also consistency with like how you kind of handle people within your organization. Is that
Correct.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. John,
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we have, and I'm going to say this as loving as I can. We have some HR folks that are just policy happy. We just can't write policy enough, in the handbook. We just can't, right?
That handbook keeps on growing.
Right. It's like 600 pages, the handbook. If that's where you are, just take a breath. Like, that's too much. Nobody's reading all that. And so be thoughtful about how much you want to engage formalized policy around things.
Yeah.
I think Jocelyn's dead on, right? Social and political lines are often blurred these days. And so I would just say be thoughtful about always, if you are unsure about how to navigate some things, first tier is always at the workplace, come back to the role and responsibility of the work. What is the role that you have? What's the duty and responsibility you have? Let's level set there. That doesn't mean that you can't have an opinion or perspective, opportunities for collaboration, but look at how you might be able to direct that. Perhaps it's time to look into various types of employee interest groups, or even some level of affinity groups. If you don't have a formalized sort of ERG or business resource group or inclusion councils, it depends on your organization, right? Size and resource. But it may be that these kinds of conversations start you to think we really need to have an outlet for people with this. And doesn't need to be a policy. It really is just an opportunity. How do we give people an opportunity to have an outlet to talk comfortably about some of these things, if they're going to do so as like a post-work opportunity in an affinity group or interest group?
Love it. Last question here. Okay. This is one I've been thinking about recently. Obviously, I'm a recruiter, so I love recruiting
What?
and hiring people. I know. It's unbelievable. Tim Sackett, I have a real job. Um, should these types of conversations, like in terms of like, is there a way to like, should they be brought up in like hiring and recruitment in terms of like I don't know. Does like should you be like, should this be part of your employer brand? Like, hey, this is what we do here. Is that appropriate? Is there like a size of company where that could be appropriate? Um, let's say if you're a really small company, you should just be clear if like, you're really strong with your political beliefs and those are going to be at work. Should that be communicated or not? I don't know. Thoughts on that? Wow, Tim. Oh
Went
man.
personal right away. Personal right away.
So Jesse said no right away, and I'm guessing like that would probably be the general consensus. But I'm
No,
just thinking
no,
about
I'm actually going to come at it from a different angle. I'm going to say yes. If your organization has made as a whole, a decision that this is who we are, this
yeah,
is our value system. As a result of this is what we're about. This is what we support. These are the ways in which resources are allocated. Lean into it if it's your truth as an organizational truth. I would absolutely put that out there, because candidates then will self-select. If they can't get behind some of the values or positional components that you're sharing, then let that be something someone would choose not to be a part of, as opposed to coming into your organization and finding all of this out after the fact. If you've really been that strong of an organization, lean into it.
Yeah, 100% agree with you, John.
which is funny because I think that is. I mean, obviously Jesse said no, but I think this is a real hard truth, right? Like you got to be real with people, and like you got to be authentic, because otherwise, someone will you could end up in an environment that then becomes hostile, and that can obviously have a huge effect on somebody's life. So,
Absolutely.
um, well, awesome. Well, Jocelyn and John, amazing to chat with you guys as always. Always just really, really thoughtful conversation and advice here. Where can Jocelyn? Where can people find out about Virgil HR? Where can people go for just more insights as well, like this?
Yeah, check out our website, VirgilHR.com, or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
And John, where can people find out about you and what you're up to?
So, a couple of ways: Humereso.com from a company standpoint. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. And then Thursdays at 10 a.m. Eastern, I'm doing But First Coffee with Jackie Clayton. You can
I,
hang out
I
there.
love it. I love it. And you both are. I can't. Well, Jocelyn, I don't think we met face to face, but really looking forward to that. But I know
Yeah,
John.
transform for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Can't wait. So everybody get to transform. That's where you
Do
need
it.
to be.
Do it.
Well, we're gonna move on to our next segment. So I'm just gonna hang up this call right now. Thank you guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.